Imagine a world with no cold calling. A world where companies don't sell your data to other companies who want to pester you. At G4 Claims, we don't cold call and we don't buy a single lead from data companies. Oh, and if you're due any compensation from your car accident, you pay nothing to us at all. For full accident management support, including motor replacement, repairs and personal injury compensation claims, just search G4 Claims today. For help the way you want it.
I love your books behind you. I've been laughing at the moment when you're seeing the politicians working from home and you're wondering if they're rescheduling their bookshelves so there's things in there that don't offend people.
I'm sure they curate their bookshelves very carefully. As you can probably see, my bookshelf is completely uncurated. The bit behind me is actually part of my archive. So the bit behind me is all books that I've got a short story in, or I've written a foreword for, or I've made some kind of contribution to. So that's the basis, and then there's a whole stack of unread books behind me as well, waiting to be dealt with. It's just the general chaos that is my office. People sometimes say, "Oh, can we film in your office?" I'm going like, "No,
you're not getting in there."
You will discover just how disorganised I am.
Val, I'd imagine for everyone that is watching or listening to this podcast, they will know exactly who you are, but you don't need any introduction. But as you can see, you're surrounded by books. You're a Scottish writer, and I mean that's took over a large part of your life, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, I've been a published author for more than half of my life. Past that milestone last year, actually. So yeah. September 1987 rather, was when my first novel was published. So I've been doing roughly one a year ever since.
How does someone like yourself, who has spent, as you said, more than half your year writing books, how do you enjoy reading other books? It must be, I sometimes feel like when I'm in my place of work, once you finish work, you want to escape, and the thought of going back to doing that in the evening would be a bit challenging, but I suppose it's just a labour of love, isn't it?
Well, it's partly, I think the act of writing and the act of reading are two very different things. I mean, they are connected. You need to be a reader, I think, to be a good writer. But it's a different process. In the same way that people say, "Oh, when I read your books, I get terrified. I'm frightened to turn the light out," or whatever. When I'm writing them, it's not that kind of experience for me because I'm in control. I know what's going to happen next. Nobody's going to die before breakfast, once I've left the office for the day. But when I'm reading somebody else's book, if they've done their job properly, I'm really sucked in, and it's very immediate. And it's also very interactive because the book then occupies the space inside my head, and it's populated with the sort of images of people that I'm creating as I'm reading. So it's a very different experience. And it does have an effect, it does have an impact on your reading life. And I think probably more so when you're starting out, because like anything, you're an apprentice, you're learning your craft, you're figuring out how to get better at what you're doing. So you're checking out what other people are doing. And so you're reading with, I suppose, a very critical eye. And somebody does something well, you're thinking, "Oh, that's really clever. I need to tuck that away and think, how can I use that in my work?" Or somebody does something really badly and you think, "Oh, I'm never going to do that."
To avoid that.
So in a way, it makes you a much more demanding reader in a way. So you're actually looking for those books that draw you in, where you're so engaged with the book itself that you're not actually thinking about the structure or the technique or how they've done the suspense or whatever, that you're just drawn in and completely engaged with it. And that doesn't happen every time I pick up a book, sad to say.
It must be really hard as well not to be critical and thinking, I wouldn't have done that, or I could do this slightly better, or
what was their editor thinking? Where was their editor? Did the editor actually look at this book? It makes you very conscious, I think, of the role of a good editor whose job is essentially to help me make my book the best it can be. My editor is not prescriptive. She doesn't say to me things like, "You have to do this and you need to change that." But we both sit down with the draft of the book and think about the things that are not quite working. And usually the things that she thinks are not quite working are things that I already know are not working. And in the process of discussing that, I generally figure out how to fix it. And so that's, for me, not to listen to your editor is madness. But I do know there are some writers who just, won't be edited. They think they know exactly how to do it. And you can see from the declining quality of the books how they're not quite learning the craft and perhaps the way they should. But I have to say, one thing that has changed as I have got older, and I suppose, I'm 65 now, and I still feel like I'm 32. But the reality is, I know that at some point this will cease. And so I have now come to a place where I will not carry on reading a bad book. I used to have that terrible...
You just put it down, you'll just chuck it, that's it, I'm done.
Chuck it. Charity shop box.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to be that sort of Scottish Presbyterian, I've started this book, I've got to finish it. But now I think life is too short for bad books and bad wine.
How quickly do you make up your judgment? As I'd imagine the wine takes a bit longer, but the books might be quicker.
Well, yeah, if it hasn't done something to interest me by page 50, and it's not really very exciting or very interesting, then I'll probably put it to one side. If I'm not sure, I'll give it a bit longer, 100 pages or so. But if I'm 100 pages in and a book's not got me rushing downstairs in the morning to pick it up and start again, then what's the point? There's so many good books out there that I can be dipping into and really enjoying. And then there's, as I said, as when it comes to dipping into, I think one of the things that is real pleasure for me in lockdown, and I don't tend to read a lot of non-fiction generally unless it's specifically to do with a book idea that I'm working on or a project I'm working on. But one of the things I've found in lockdown is the joys of non-fiction books that are sort of split into sections. So I can sit down first thing in the morning before I start on whatever novel I'm reading and just read a few pages that is sort of complete in and of itself and takes me into a world I don't know anything about. I'm reading a book at the moment about colour.
Right.
And it's just every morning I read a wee bit before I start on, the novel that I'm reading, and it's different and it's full of wee stories, and I love wee stories, and I love trivia really. Sort of the story behind a particular shade of yellow that Renaissance painters used that then went out of fashion in the mid-19th century. Why did that happen? It's a daft wee thing, and it's probably never going to be of any use to me whatsoever. But I like to be stimulated, like my curiosity to be stimulated.
Tell me this, Val, that does not sound like something that you would hear from a working class girl that's brought up in Kirkcaldy. How did your journey bring you to this? And I don't mean that in a bad way to put down anyone from Kirkcaldy, as many people know. I'm from Motherwell, as working class as you get, but I think it's important to note that the stereotypes would not put you in that bracket.
Well, no, I grew up very much in a working class family, working class background in Fife. When I was born, my dad worked in the shipyard, my granddads were both miners. But they were that generation of working class in Scotland that actually understood the way to get your kids a better life than they'd had, better life chances than they had, was through education. And so my mum used to take me to the library well before I could even read. When I was a toddler, she'd put me in the pram and wheel me across Temple Hall Estate to the library there and sit and read me picture books. And then when I was about 6 years old, we moved down the town opposite the Central Library. And that just became my home from home. As an only child, I was always looking inside my head for entertainment. And I found that in the library. And I was lucky enough to go to Kirkcaldy High School, which at the time was a school that valued academic excellence, but it also valued extracurricular things. So you were expected to do sport, you were expected to participate in music, whether that was in a choir or an orchestra. You were expected to find something that interested you in the sort of after school things and get stuck into that. And I got involved with the debating society, for example. And so I guess the combination of those things gave me a curiosity. I've always wanted to find out more, to understand more. And again, because of the breadth of the Scottish education system, I wasn't just channeled into a narrow path early on. So, my hires were English, French and Latin, maths, physics and chemistry.
Brilliant.
So it gave me huge opportunities. And I think, that I look around now and I regret that the modern schooling system does not seem to provide the same opportunities to our kids as I certainly had.
Absolutely. It sounds like when you were at school, there was as you touched on, your hires were broad, and I feel, it's been a while since I was at school now, but I've got a younger sister who lives in the Highlands who's going through her hires at the moment, and I feel from such a young age nowadays that they force people into a corner to know exactly what they want to be when they're older, or to know exactly what subjects you have to pick them in first or second year at school now, and I feel that it puts a lot of pressure on kids, that don't know what they want to do, and it almost boxes them into something without letting them express themselves.
I think there's a lot of truth in that, and I think there's a tendency with the focus on national curriculums and exams for teachers to be forced to teach to the exam, to teach to the curriculum,
Absolutely.
instead of basically going where their own enthusiasms take them. And I can remember teachers that would go off on all sorts of odd tangents because that was something that really interested them. So you'd end up watching a film in the French class because the French teacher thought it was a really interesting film that you might enjoy,
Yeah.
instead of just strictly, here's some irregular verbs we're going to get through today. And English teachers who would share their passions for particular writers with you, whether you wanted to be shared or not. But there was a sense, I think, a lot of the time of enthusiasm,
Absolutely.
and that was communicated. For me, anyway, it's communicated very well. There were still things that I hated, and I never really got. I mean, physics. There was nobody more astonished than my physics teacher that I got an A in my higher physics because I never understood half of what I was doing. But I copied a lot of Sandra McLaren's notes.
All credit to Sandra right there.
Aye, absolutely.
It's really interesting that you touch on that as well, because without harking on too much about your life, Val, you went on to go to St Hilda's College in Oxford, and again, I hate to box people into stereotypes, but from someone from Kirkcaldy, or even from someone that didn't go to a private school in England, that is very unusual.
Well, I was actually the first student from a Scottish state school that St Hilda's had accepted. And I went. I was very young because I'd skipped a year between primary and high school, and did my Oxford entrance when I was 16. And I went down for my interview, and I remember the principal said to me, "You've never taken anyone from a Scottish state school before," as if I was some sort of exotic creature. And I said, "Well, it's about time you started."
I love it.
I was I was brought up in a house. My dad was a great Burns man, and he brought me up with the belief that I was as good as anybody else, and that if I could get somewhere on my own merits, then nobody had the right to put me down or say I didn't belong. And I ended up applying for Oxford, I think, because I didn't feel I belonged. I felt like an outsider. I at the time I thought it was mostly because I wanted to be a writer, and that was a desire that formed quite early on. I think I was about 9 or 10, and I used to read these books called the Shalley School books. One of the characters in the Shalley School books had grown up to become a writer, and in one of the books she gets a letter from a publisher, and there's a check in the envelope, and I'm like, it's the first time it dawned on me that writers got paid money, that it was a job, it's a proper job. You could do this for a living, make stuff up, and get paid for it. And so that was the point where I decided that was what I wanted to be. And I spent, I think, most of my teens feeling like an outsider, feeling that there was something that made me different, and I didn't really know what it was. I mean, I know now that a large part of it was my sexuality. Because growing up in Fife in the 1960s, early 70s, there were no gay people. There was no, and there were no templates in the world around you. There wasn't desirable gay lives in fiction or on screen, or and if you can't see it, you can't be it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why it was I felt that I didn't belong, but I knew that I wanted to spread my wings, and that was partly also, I think, because my reading, my years of reading the contents of Kirkcaldy Library had given me a kind of wider horizon. I didn't just want to do what everybody else did. I mean, the received wisdom at Kirkcaldy High School was that if you were really clever, you went to Edinburgh or St Andrews. And if you weren't quite so clever, you went to Dundee or Stirling, and then you came back to Kirkcaldy. Yeah. And I just knew instinctively that wasn't what I needed. And so I thought, well, that's it. I want to spread my wings further. Where am I going to go? And I knew nothing about England or English universities or anything. We'd been to England once, to Blackpool for a holiday, which, as you will imagine, did not really set me up for going to Oxford.
It's like,
But well, yeah. So I thought, well, what can I do here? And again, we come back to the Shalley School, my key influence in my life, really. But girls from the Shalley School, when they went off from the school into further education, they went to basically one of three places, because this was an international school. So they either went to the Sorbonne in Paris, and I knew that my French wasn't good enough for that, or they went to Oxford, or they went to the Kensington School of Needlework. So I knew that was a no-no. Because trust me, I can barely sew on a button. And so I thought, well, I'll go to Oxford. Why not? And everybody at the school, apart from my English teacher, thought that this was a terrible idea. I remember the rector said to me, there's no point in you applying. You won't get in, and that will reflect badly on us. But I had one teacher, my English teacher, Wilf Alsop, who believed that absolutely I could do this. And he gave up lots of his free periods to coach me for the entrance exam in things that would come up in the English A-level syllabus that we didn't cover. So like Chaucer and Milton and some Shakespeare. And so when I went off for my Oxford entrance, I was, gallus, I suppose. It didn't occur to me that I didn't have the right to be there.
Was there any doubt in your mind? Were you nervous at all, or were you thinking when you get there, and it's very grandeur, and I can imagine for many it would be intimidating.
It was very intimidating. I mean, when I went for my interview, it was sort of dead of winter. It's December, and I'd gone down to. I stayed overnight in London with the parents of a friend of mine, and I arrived in London. I mean, honest to God, I was the country hick in the big city, sort of standing there. It was Christmas. The lights in Regent Street, I'd never seen anything like it. So I was standing there with a cardboard suitcase, looking at these lights, going, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" And then the next day, I got the train up to Oxford, and it was really foggy because it's quite low lying, Oxford, and quite damp, and it gets a lot of mists and damp in the winter. And it was that thing where you're in the taxi going up from the station, and there's these amazing buildings, this medieval honey-coloured stone, but you can hardly see any of it through the fog. And I was just thinking, what have I come to? This is really spooky and strange. It was very right from the get-go. It was completely strange. It was a complete culture shock. And when I finally arrived to start my degree, it was really. I mean, people just didn't understand me, as I had a good grade 5 accent. Ken didn't know what I was saying.
Were you saying Ken when you were down there?
Huh?
Were you still saying Ken when you were down there?
Aye, still saying Ken when I arrived. I was like, I'll get grade 5, Ken, and they didn't ken what I was saying, and so I had to learn to speak English.
Well, not all over again.
So my partner says what you hear now is my Radio 4 Scottish accent.
Absolutely.
But when I go back to the football on a Saturday, she says, first time we went to the football together, she said, I thought you'd had a stroke when we got out of the car. The way you were speaking.
Is this the same person? Who's wearing that mask?
Yeah. So it was a strange experience. But I mean, it's funny because I always thought that it was Oxford that was the exotic place. But I remember going to a reunion a few years ago, and one of my cohort saying to me, "We all thought you were terribly exotic." I was like, "Not exotic, I'm from Fife."
But it's funny that, because they must all come from a similar type of background, and not to put everyone in Oxford in the same bracket, similar to Kirkcaldy earlier, but it does primarily be an upper class thing. It's a lot of people from wealthy families. Would that be fair to say?
I think it was less the case in St Hilda's than in a lot of colleges. St Hilda's has always had a very sort of egalitarian feel to it, and I mean, I had amongst my sort of group in my first year was somebody who was the daughter of an earl, but there was also somebody whose father worked on the bins in Manchester.
Really?
So there was a broad range of people, mostly from grammar schools, it had to be said, and quite a lot from private schools. But it wasn't quite the Brideshead Revisited thing that people imagine it was.
What was it like going back to the reunion? Because I always find that going back to something many years later can be strange. And I suppose you touched on a thing that I wanted to ask you there as well, was your school teacher that, really pushed you through. Did you ever go back and see him at a later date? Did you keep in
Oh
touch?
yeah, I mean, Wilf and his family became good friends. Good, I mean, they're still friends. I mean, I was actually was texting his widow just yesterday because she's just got the vaccine.
Right.
So
All right for
they're
some.
kind of part of my extended family, really.
Brilliant.
Partly because Wilf and his wife Evelyn became members of Kirkcaldy Bowling Club, which was where my parents were stalwarts.
Right.
So they knew each other through the bowling club. So really, it just became sort of, I say, extended sort of family kind of thing. Because when I was going off to Oxford, I mean, you get this vast reading list, and I just looked at this reading list and thought, I can't afford all these books. And Wilf basically said, come round and borrow any of my books you need.
That's amazing.
So I went round with a big cardboard box,
Family man.
staggered home.
It's interesting because I feel, and Val, you can tell me if I was wrong here. Did the people from Kirkcaldy support you in your venture? Because I think in Scotland we're often guilty of, if someone's doing well and someone's going on to bigger and brighter things and really pushing themselves, we're guilty of having that attitude where it's, who do they think they are? You know?
Well, I would say that yeah, it had a kind of mixed response. Um, Certainly, there's a lot of people who were really supportive, and some of them remain friends to this day. But you're right, there was people thinking I'd got above myself.
Hmm.
Um, but
It's ridiculous, isn't it? Not to compare us to America, especially in these times at the moment, but I feel that Americans, for example, are very much, they push their fellow beings to be the best that they can, whereas in Scotland it's like, "Ugh, away you go, that's not quite us."
yeah, well, I think that there can be some of that, yeah. But I mean, I would say, generally speaking, that's not really been my experience in Kirkcaldy. And I mean, my involvement with Raith Rovers, for example. I mean, you would think that people wouldn't really welcome me back with open arms. Having sort of left and done the things I've done and established the kind of reputation I have. But totally the opposite. I mean, it's like you're one of us,
Absolutely.
and that's that. Somebody said to me, it was one day I was coming back, I was walking back through the south stand, which is the home stand, and I was sort of going back to the main stand, and they were shouting abuse at the manager of the opposing team. You know that well-known chant, "You fat bastard," and one of them caught my eye and says, "We don't mean you, by the way."
That's terrible. That's shocking.
No, it's funny. It's funny. Um,
Are you still on the board
so
there, Val? Are you on the board?
no, I'm not on the board. I haven't been on the board for some time.
Yeah.
Not on the main board. Um,
I think that's something that's fantastic about football, and I'm heavily involved with Motherwell Football Club myself. And, I mean, for me, I love supporting my local team, and I think it's similar to Raith and Kirkcaldy. It's almost like the main focus of the community. When there's not a lot of great things going for that community, this is the thing that gives people hope. Uh,
yeah,
but what I would say is you almost touched on it there. It's people from all backgrounds, from all over the town that come
yeah.
together, and there is a unity, and there's so much negative press around football and football supporters, but for me that's what's special about it.
Yeah, I mean the tribe can be a really good thing,
Absolutely.
and I think with particularly with local clubs, where you don't get people bussing in from the other side of Scotland to come to a match, but that actually it's your team, your town, and people do actually come back to watch the Rovers from all over Scotland, but for different sort of reasons. But that's because it's their team and because they grew up with it. And they've inculcated it in their children, and they come and watch it. But I think in Scotland, once you get out of the very top level of the Premier Division, you're talking local clubs, you're talking family clubs, you're talking, families where they're in their third or fourth generation of supporting the club, and that gives, as you say, there's a sense of solidarity, and certainly when you're dealing with towns that throughout the central belt of Scotland have been economically systematically depressed since the 1980s.
Yeah.
It's often when the football club's doing well, it puts a smile on people's face. And certainly, in Kirkcaldy and Raith Rovers, there's a real sense of being part of the community, being involved in sort of various charitable things. The food bank is always there, at match days, support, collecting for the people in Kirkcaldy who have been forced by economic circumstances to use a food bank. And so there is a sense really there of being part of the fabric of the town.
It's a real shame that the football clubs are this vehicle for change. That it's left to either the likes of Raith Rovers or, be it in my case, Motherwell, to actually make a change because the government are failing.
Yeah, and it takes Marcus Rashford, to use his fame and his position. I mean, all credit to him for, he could just have been another spoilt brat in the English Premier League, with his fast cars and nightclubs, but he actually has chosen to use his power for good, as it were. And you kind of hope that shames other people into taking advantage of their position. I'm not saying give all their money away or anything like that, I'm saying, but use your position for good. Use your position to put pressure on people like the government in Westminster, and indeed sometimes in Scotland we need to do the same thing, to put that pressure on.
I seen Johnson in Parliament recently, and it might even have been this week when we're recording, and he was saying, "Well, in Marcus Rashford, thank you for holding us to account." And I'm thinking, that's ridiculous. Don't get me wrong, as you said, absolutely credit to himself, to his family, to his community, and to the country. But to openly admit that a football player is holding you to account when you've got an opposition party sitting across the benches there, and also, if you're acknowledging that he's holding you to account, why are you making these decisions in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, today Boris Johnson been saying, "Oh, these food parcels are absolutely shocking and disgraceful." It's your government that organised this. Gave the contract to your pals, who've spent £5 on the food that's in the boxes out of the £30 they're being paid for it. Don't even start me on that nonsense. It's so much of this government in Westminster has been about cronyism. Reward your pals, give them the contracts. Whether or not they can actually do anything that you give them the contracts for, just get the money. This government and its members are not the ones who are losing out in this pandemic and this Brexit. You get the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who moved all these companies' monies into Ireland before Brexit. We could sit here all afternoon listing the appalling things they've done since they were elected, and it's just a disgrace. They're lucky they've had the fiasco of Trump in America to take attention away from them.
Val, I've had many, artists, be that musicians or fellow writers like yourself on the podcast, and I've often said to them, and a lot of the time they tend to be left-leaning, pro-independent supporters, or, and I've said, has it ever crossed your mind not to speak out about your politics because it may affect, in your respect, people who read your books, or it may affect how many people in other guests' respect, how many people download or listen to your tunes or your music? And I don't know, was that ever in your mind when you were becoming an aspiring writer, or when you were becoming a bit more established, to think, am I isolating people here?
No, I mean, I think there's no point in being a creative artist of any type if you're going to be dishonest.
Fully agree.
If you're not going to be who you are. Way back in the 1980s when I wrote my first novels, the Lindsay Gordon novels, and she's the first British lesbian detective. People would say, did you not think about doing something different? Did you not think about not making her a lesbian? I said, well, that was the way she came out. I didn't sit there and think, I'm going to make a point here. But I wanted to write something that I cared about, that I understood and that I wanted to communicate. So for me, there was no point in hiding who I am. And in the same way, if somebody asks me a question, I'll answer it. And sometimes I'll answer it saying, like, I don't know, I have no opinion on that, I haven't thought about that. But if it is something I have an opinion about, I'll express my opinion. And if some people see that as a reason not to buy my books, not to watch my television series, fair enough. Their loss.
It says more about them than it does you. I'm very sure.
Yeah, I mean, I read books by people whose political views are not mine. I have friends who are crime writers who do not share my views on politics, on independence, and I don't not read their books because of that, and I don't not have a drink with them in the bar because of that.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's perfectly possible to have differing opinions from people that you spend time with, and it not come down to punishing each other in the bar.
You mentioned the first Lindsay Gordon there, your first book that was published back in the late 80s, and you says, it wasn't a choice to make the first lesbian detective, but I think, Val, whether that was a conscious decision or not, I think it's very important because, in my opinion, representation is huge. And to hear people like yourself, putting lesbians out there for other people, it gives people a platform and says, like you says, when you're growing up in Kirkcaldy, there was no one there to look up to. This was alien to people in Kirkcaldy at that time. And I think that goes back to a lot of things as well, be that, working class voices and in the arts as well, or on television. It's the more that there's a representation there, I think the more important it is that it paves a way for other people coming through.
Yeah, I mean, I think partly at the back of my head, although I don't think I articulated it at the time, was the thought that I didn't want the next generation of in Fife growing up without any kind of template, any kind of role model, any kind of notion that you could be a lesbian, or you could be different in any particular way and still be okay. And so that for me, that one of the things about writing Lindsay Gordon was just to say you can be okay, because the Lindsay Gordon novels are not about being a lesbian. They're crime novels whose detective happens to be gay, and they're not political proselytizing, and they're not here's the novel about coming out. They're just somebody having an ordinary life, apart from the fact that when she has a romantic relationship with someone, it's another woman and not a guy. And that was what I wanted to write. I wanted to write about the ordinary lives that gay people have. Because I don't go to the supermarket in a particularly lesbian way. I don't do my washing in a particularly gay way. My life, the vast majority of my life, is just like anybody else's.
Absolutely.
So in that sense, there's nothing strange going on.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
think it's very important that you have gave people that voice, and you are a role model now, whether you would like to admit that or not. That there's people
Oh,
out there that see you as, I can aspire to be like Val.
well, in some respects, I would hope. Not everything, perhaps, but yeah, you do need. We all need people that our lives having some congruence with, I suppose. And it's like, I've often sort of talked about people ask me about how Scottish crime fiction took so long to develop, and how it did come through in the end. And with most of these things, what you need is one person to kind of kick the door open a wee bit. And then, some more people come behind you and push the door a bit further open, and then you get swamped by a tsunami. And that's great. There's nothing more exciting than that, to see people finding a voice. And that's what we're seeing, I think, with this whole Black Lives Matter stuff now. The publishing industry's had a huge wake-up call, and suddenly they're taking seriously the aspirations of writers of colour in this country, and I'm absolutely delighted to see that. And side by side with that, at the same time as we've got a development of BAME writing in this country, we're also seeing a surge of working class writing. There's a sort of real movement now to listen to working class voices, and that's one of the reasons why it's so brilliant that Shuggie Bain won the Booker Prize.
Brilliant.
That just hugely important, because it gives us that mirror, that window into other worlds that are not our worlds. And reading, that's one of the great joys of reading, is that it takes you into other people's lives. It gives you an understanding of what their experience is like. And that goes both ways. It goes from, sort of, the upper classes getting an understanding of what other people's lives are like at the bottom, but it also gives you an understanding, if you're working class, of how those other people live. And it kind of gives you an armory as well to go into battle against those things that you don't approve of, that you don't like. And I've said this before, and I'll doubtless say it again, because if I'll do nothing else if not repeat myself, is that I think what's really interesting is that I think the countries that have done best in the pandemic in many respects are the countries that are led by women who read fiction. And I think it's partly the gender, but I think it's more importantly the reading of fiction, because fiction gives you empathy. Fiction forces you to look at the world through somebody else's perspective. And I think if you're governing a country, you need to understand the lives of your citizens. And so I'd much rather be governed by, a leader like Nicola Sturgeon, who says yesterday, closing down all but essential retailers, which include bookshops. That to me, I think, is a great statement of the importance of reading and the importance of understanding other lives, that we don't just live in our wee silos. And it's been instructive to me to see how many people have spoken openly about the importance of reading in this pandemic, the importance of being able to access ebooks and audiobooks online from the libraries, the importance of being able to get books delivered still to their houses. And I think it's been a lifesaver, I think, for a lot of people, because it's given them a sense of a world beyond their window.
It really is that sense of escapism, and I actually think, Val, that is, for me personally, been something that I have really looked forward to during this pandemic. Is, do you know what, we can't go outside, we can't meet with friends and family, but let's try and get ourselves into a book. Let's get head first in here and step into another world, step into another realm that you're not used to. And I would have questioned you on the women leaders statement that you made there if I didn't fully agree with you. I'd be wondering if it was just because Nicola maybe had one of your books behind her and a couple of appearances that she's had on the telly.
No, but no, I mean, if you look at them, like, the Iceland's Prime Minister, Katrín Jakobsdóttir, who did her master's degree on the crime novels of Arnar Dúlindríðarson, and Jacinda Ardern talks about reading fiction from childhood onwards. Sanna Marin in Finland also talks about it. This is not by chance, I think. Which is not to say that, there are not men out there who read fiction and have that sort of empathy, but honestly, every time I see politicians and what they've got behind them is a shelf of political biographies and economic histories and all that kind of thing, I'm thinking, you're not getting it. You're really not getting it. You don't know what people think. You don't know how people feel. The people that you're governing, you have no understanding of their lives, and so you govern badly.
Absolutely, and it's an interesting choice, the countries that you mentioned there, like Finland and Iceland as well, because this is small independent nations governed by women who seem to be doing very, very well. And if you listen to many political commentators, they'll tell you that we're too small. We don't know what we're doing. We don't have the resources there, and these countries seem to be blowing that myth out the park.
Absolutely, and I think this is a myth that we're too small and too scared and all those things. We're not too anything. We should be too gallus, if anything. That's where our tradition
example of going to Oxford. We should walk into the debate chamber or the negotiations like that.
Yeah. So I think we should have that as our slogan. Sort of be gallus, be confident, self-belief. It's so important. It's important at a national level as well as an individual level. And I hate to see people's confidence being eroded in so many different sorts of ways, because maintaining your self-confidence is such an important thing.
It's really interesting that you mentioned self-belief is so important, not only in a national level but a personal level, because I do feel, and I hate to say this, that sometimes as Scots we do lack self-belief, and we've gave so much to the world in terms of, we could sit here all day and name the things that Scotland have given to the world, but I think as a nation of people, we really do lack self-belief, and we don't realise that the contribution that we have given.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that, and I mean, when I edited a book last year with my partner called Imagine a Country, and it's a book of short essays. We sent out the call to basically everybody we could think of, and a lot of people came back to us. We asked them to imagine the country. Imagine one thing about a country you would like to live in. And we got an astonishing array of responses, and so almost 99 contributors in the end, with all sorts of things, some really big, important issues, but some quite small issues that when you look at them, you realise what a big difference they make. And one of the ones that really struck me was Damien Barr actually talking about Scottish history and saying how he had learned absolutely no Scottish history at school, that the history that he'd had at the school had been about Great Britain, and which meant England mostly.
Yeah.
And that he just was ignorant about the history of his country. And that had been something that he'd taken upon himself as an adult to find out more about. And maybe that's something where we should be, starting to instill confidence in ourselves by making sure that our kids understand the country that they've been born into, or the country that they're living in, and have a sense not just of the present but of the historical past. It's that old thing about, if you don't understand your history, you're condemned to repeat it.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we learn where we've come from so that we can figure out where we're going to.
I think Damien will have had a similar schooling to myself. He's just from up the road, and without going off on a tangent, he's got a great show at the moment on BBC Scotland.
Yes.
He's Big Book Club, which I think is brilliant. And he also featured a writer that I had on the podcast previously, Graham Armstrong, who's another working class voice that published the Young Team last year, and has had great reviews from that. But I think that's so true what he said, and it was really, really a bugbear of mine at school. In history we learned about the Titanic and they put on the movie, and you're thinking we learned about Braveheart and they showed Mel Gibson. It's obscene.
Yeah.
When you think about the rich and vast history that Scotland have, why is that what they're teaching you in school? I just can't put it into words. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I was astonished some years ago now. I mean, probably about 15 years ago now. I picked up a book in America. I was on a book tour in America, and I picked up a book in a bookshop called "How the Scots Invented the Modern World."
Yeah.
And this was a book about the history of Scotland in terms of its ideas and its development, scientific ideas, philosophical ideas. And I had to go to America to find this book.
Yep. And if you look at the way the Americans fawn over Scottish and Irish history, and you think they're more proud of our history than we are in certain parts, it's...
Yeah, but there you go. I do think that we should give people a sense of pride in themselves, and I think that too often people have that self-confidence stripped away from them. There's too many ways in which it's easy to take people's pride in themselves away, and I think too often that happens in our society, and we see the consequences.
And I think it's very easy as well, Val, for us to hark on about the negatives, but I think looking forward, there's got to be some positives for Scotland and coming out of this pandemic. I mean, it's been a terrible situation for many, and we touched on it earlier that people are struggling, and probably an outlet for many has been reading. But I think coming out of this, there's lots of lessons that we should have learned, and I hope in a way that it makes people look at the world differently going forward.
I hope so. I mean, I certainly, when the first lockdown started, it seemed to me that people were being kinder to each other and being more supportive of each other. But as it's gone on, a lot of that seems to have kind of worn away, and people are not being as considerate of each other as they were to begin with. In fact, in some respects, they're being completely inconsiderate of each other. Yeah. One more house on this street decides they've got the builders, and I may have to go out and commit an act of violence.
Yeah.
But it's easy for us to retreat into our silos and to go back into those of us who are okay to say I'm okay, and so I'm just going to pull up the shutters and let the rest of you get on with it. But we have to remember that we're part of a community, that we're part of a wider community, and continually deny Margaret Thatcher's claim that there's no such thing as society.
Absolutely, and I think unfortunately that when she made that claim, it seems to have stuck in many cases, and I think you often see that people are very much individualistic and they're out for themselves. But as you mentioned at the start of the pandemic, and it's just small gestures, but we had people round about here going out and doing shopping for the elderly and making sure that they had things in, even though it may seem tokenistic now, the Thursday night clap for the carers. These things actually brought people together, And it was the first time in a long time that I had seen that. Not to go back to football, but I think the only time that I'd seen community spirit before that was maybe when Motherwell reached a cup final and everyone was out together. But
Yeah.
it really is lacking, and I think that throughout this pandemic, hopefully at the end of it, when we see a brighter light, that there is a bigger sense of community, and we can actually think, what can we do together for the greater good?
Yeah, and Raith Rovers, we didn't get our cup final last
Right.
because of the pandemic. The Tunnocks Caramel Wafer Cup. But I'm told that we may yet play the cup final, and that'll certainly put a smile on people's face.
That would be brilliant. What have you got in the pipeline, Val? I know that you brought a book out earlier this year. Sorry, last year, Still Life as well. And is
Yeah.
it planned for 2021 in the pipeline?
Well, Still Life will be coming out in paperback in February. And I've got my first foray into a graphic novel is
Brilliant.
coming out in May. I actually just got the proof of the American edition just yesterday. And it's actually it's quite strange because it's not a crime book at all. I mean, I wrote a series of radio plays 3 years ago called Resistance, or 4 years ago, 2017, and this was part of a project which is organised Medical Museum in London and an amazing resource library there. And every year they have a project where they bring together writers, radio dramatists, and radio producers and scientists. And they choose a particular theme each year, and you spend a couple of days with the scientists, and then you pitch an idea to Radio 4 for a drama or whatever. And the year I was asked to do this, the subject was antimicrobial resistance.
Okay.
Basically, there's a plague coming, and we're going to all get killed. And we had Sally Davis, who was then the chief medical officer for England and Wales, talking to us, and it was absolutely terrifying. The fact that antibiotics are now effectively probably useless against the next plague that comes.
Yeah.
And of course, that was antibiotics for a bacterial plague rather than a viral plague like we're enduring at the moment. So I went away and I thought about this, and I thought the only thing I can pitch is an apocalypse. So I came up with this idea of a superbug, as it were, basically that decimates, more than decimates, the population of the world. And I did my radio dramas, and following on from that, Wellcome wanted me to turn it into a novel, and I didn't want to turn it into a novel because I get a bit like that sort of, I've written it once, I don't want to write it again. And then we came up with the idea of doing it as a graphic novel, and I started working with an American artist called Catherine Briggs, who was based in Dundee at the time, and she's since had to go back to the States because of visa issues and all that. But we worked together on this, and it was all done and dusted early summer last year, and we thought it's not the best time to be doing this book, and I felt as if it would be seen as being exploitative of where we were at that particular point. So we kind of held it back, and now that we have the prospect of the vaccine and the prospect of something like life returning to normal, we're going ahead with it in May, I think, and I think it looks fantastic. It just looks really, just really exciting, and it's been a great project to be part of, and it looks great. I mean, she's a really interesting artist, and there's lots of different styles in
Fantastic.
in the book, and I hope people will find it interesting.
How was it with that? Because that's obviously new to yourself, and you've done so many novels in itself. But a graphic novel, was it? Are you almost sceptical that the graphics or the visuals don't match up with the story, or were you very much go do your own thing and I'll give you the wording for it?
Well, it was essentially, I mean, because it had been a radio drama originally, all there was dialogue.
Okay.
So the sort of physical images were entirely up to Catherine, and we went through various early drafts of her drafting out the drawings of the characters and things before we settled on what we ended up with. So everybody, I think, was happy with what we've ended up with, and hopefully people will read it and find it instructive and also, I suppose, positive in lots of ways, that even out of all of what went on in this pandemic, and the pandemic in the book, that people found hope at the end, that there was a way forward. So that's on the stocks, and also I've got this year's crime novel, of course, to write, And I found myself in great difficulties when I finished Still Life. And Still Life actually ends on the eve of the first lockdown. And it was weird because when I was writing the book, the pandemic didn't exist. There was not even a shadow of it. But as I was writing, it of course developed. And the book, in my plan, the book had always been set in February 2020. So I did that. And I got to the end of it, I thought, what am I going to write next? And I found I was really struggling because all of my books, one way or another, are set very much in the here and now. They're set in the real world. You can identify them in terms of place and time, and I felt really kind of there was no solid ground to stand on because everything changes at the moment on day to day, almost week by week. It's a different world, a different picture, and I thought I don't know how to write in the here and now when the here and now is just a shifting sand. That there's no place for me to stand. And so I've been vaguely toying with an idea for a while about writing a series of novels, actually a quintet of novels set at 10-year intervals, 79, 89, 99, 2009, 2019, and with the same protagonist, but not necessarily doing the same job throughout the series. And so I thought, well, I'll just get started on that because at least I know what happened in 1979. so that's what I'm writing at the moment. I'm writing 1979.
That's exciting. That's fantastic.
It is exciting, and it's fascinating to see how many parallels there are in so many aspects of what's going on now, socially, politically, culturally. So it's I'm enjoying it.
And Val, as well as being an award-winning author, you must be missing gigs as well because you're a bit of a rock star these days.
Yeah. Really miss the band. We started the Fun Loving Crime Writers. It really is a bit of fun, and suddenly it took off. And we should have done, I think, something like 13 gigs last year, and of course, almost all of them had to be cancelled. The last gig we did was Paisley back in February, and yeah, we miss it. It surprised me how much pleasure it is to sit down and make music again with the guys who are, they're all really good at what they do, and we have a great time. We avoid the usual reason that bands break up. Bands usually seem to break up because of musical differences, and because we only do cover versions, there's not a situation of somebody coming in and saying, "This is my great new song," and everybody else going, "Well, that's shite." So we've avoided those kind of differences of opinion, if you like, and we've become really close friends as well as being bandmates. I mean, but for us, I mean, the high point was playing Glastonbury in 2019. I mean, a bunch of middle-aged crime writers getting up on stage on the acoustic stage at Glastonbury and playing to thousands of people. It was just bizarre.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's great. I love singing. I love singing with the guys.
I had Christopher on, and he was saying on the podcast before, and thanks to Chris for putting me in touch with yourself, and he was saying, before this, I wasn't really a guitarist, and now I'm playing shows at Glastonbury, and all over the country. It's like a tour.
He wasn't a guitarist at all. Chris sneaked into the band by the back door. It was originally he was invited to be a guest vocalist on the first gig that we did at the Edinburgh Book Festival, and he came. He turned up at rehearsal, and we rehearsed Werewolves of London, and he came on. It was great. It was lovely. And then we met a few weeks later for another rehearsal before our next big gig, and he turned up having learned the harmonies for all the songs and having bought a guitar. And now he actually progressed. I mean, he's totally committed himself to this. He's been practicing every single day and reached the point now where he's now playing lead guitar on one number.
That's amazing.
So it's just like total commitment. I mean, that's Chris. When he goes for something, he just goes for it. So, he's now absolutely at the heart of the band. Couldn't do without him.
As much as it's great to see, the progress that you've made and the gigs that you've played, I think it also pushes a bigger picture as well, that as much as you're all crime writers in your own right, there's not a competitive edge there to a certain degree. You're all very supportive, and it seems like there's a great network.
Yeah, I think the crime writing community, by and large, is a very supportive and very friendly bunch, and I think it's mostly because crime writers become crime writers because they love reading crime fiction. So you're always bumping into people whose books you've read and enjoyed, and there's a kind of respect for what we do, and there's not a sense of, if I say to you, you should be reading Doug Johnson, that you're suddenly going to go, oh, I'm not going to read Val anymore, I'll just read Doug.
Yeah.
There's plenty of books out there and plenty of time to read people. And so, yeah, there's not a sense of competitive. We kind of work together, and it's the kind of feeling that the band has been a way to bring really a very different writers together, but still show that we can be supportive of each other and enjoy each other's work as well as enjoying each other's company on stage. And the other thing I've been doing during the lockdown, which also sort of started off as a bit of a daft thing, is I've been doing cookery videos.
Brilliant! Have you been doing them on
the books? Aye, they're on YouTube.
Oh, I need to watch it. I
Cooking
haven't
the
seen any of them.
Yeah, recipes from the fiction kitchen.
Well,
It's a bit of nonsense, really. Started off.
Speciality dishes. What's your go-to choice?
Well, I mean, the one that people seem to be most excited about was Karen Pirry's lentil stovies.
If ever there was a Fifer in there, that's it.
Yeah, well, it started off because people are often sort of talking about the food in the books, because a lot of times people are not particularly familiar with the kind of Scottish specialities, particularly, and so they asked me about them, and so we thought it'd be quite fun, a different thing to do from just sitting about doing Zoom events that would do these recipes. So they're loosely tied into the books or to my wider community. And my partner has become a very skilled videographer over the pandemic, and so yeah, we did 8 series of 8, one a week for 8 weeks to begin with, because we just did one for a bit of fun. And everybody said give us more, and then we did a Halloween special, and we did a Christmas special, and a Hogmanay special. So who knows when the next special will be?
I'm going to have to go back and check these out, Val. I apologise for not seeing them, but it sounds very exciting.
It'll change your life.
I'm going to be cooking up a storm, I'll tell you. Honestly, though, it's been an absolute pleasure, Val, and thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and all the best for the year going ahead.
You're welcome, and thanks for the chat.
And thanks to everyone who has watched or listened to this episode of the DW podcast. If you've not, please like and subscribe, and please check out some previous episodes.